Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the RWTH Gesture Code project. And before I begin, I want to give you some hand gestures with which we're going to communicate tonight, okay? So just watch this video. These are gestures that you're going to be able to perform to tell me, while I'm speaking, how you're feeling about what I'm saying. Okay, let's go.
First of which is twinkles. This is to show agreement with something. The second one is down twinkles, which is to show that you disagree with something that is said.
Okay, if you agree with something that I'm saying, you perform twinkles. Let's see this, please. If there's something that you disagree with or that you're unhappy about, then it's down twinkles, okay? This is a way for you to give me feedback about what I'm saying without actually interrupting me. Okay. My name's Simon Harrison. I'm conducting research at the Human Technology Center. This is a project house of the RWTH on Theaterplatz, and you can see our Pimp My Car wagon in front of the Theaterplatz. There's 7 projects. Ours is natural media, and we study gestures. You might have seen this picture. It featured on the front cover of Klenkers not so long ago. Okay, my project in particular focuses on gestures in environments where it's not so easy to speak. Yeah, like... okay. To speak. Sorry. For example, in factories. In industrial environments, it's difficult to speak. Okay? So we use gestures to communicate. Now, the video I showed you at the beginning comes from the Occupy movement in the States. How many of you are familiar with the Occupy movement? Good, okay. It began in September 2011 on Wall Street in New York, and it began as a peaceful protest movement against economic and social inequality. Okay, and these hand gestures that I showed you, they were part of a system that was used to help people communicate in groups. So when they were having the group assemblies and deciding what was important and not, they had these gestures to tell the speaker whether or not what they were saying was being interpreted positively or negatively. Now, what's interesting about this for gesture researchers is that, like the Occupy movement, as the Occupy movement spread across the United States, so did the gesture code. And we've never seen this before. We know that gesture codes exist, as you'll see, but we've never seen the spontaneous conventionalization and wide-scale distribution of a gesture code. So this was taken from Al Jazeera website just a month after the movement began, and these are sites where the movement was taking place. Now, whether or not gestures were being used there, I don't know, but in most of these places, some version of the hand signals were being used. Let me give you a little bit of background about gesture codes, but before I do, can I ask, please, for a temperature check? That is to say, are we all agreeing up to this point, or are we disagreeing? Temperature check, please. Okay, I got you. Right, gesture codes, what are they? For example, how do gesture codes work? Here's a little bit of theory, not too complicated, hopefully. Gestures are a visual means of communication. They allow people to encode a shared vocabulary of very basic meanings. Okay, they also allow you to communicate across space. So you can perceive a gesture from quite far away, whereas speaking you need to shout, which can be quite annoying. With a gesture, you can keep a message in space visible for a lot longer than speech. Gestures, although they are culturally marked, they are easily understood, especially in multilingual environments. And what is interesting about gestures for tonight, particularly, is that they are a non-interruptive means to communicate. So, for example, you can perform a gesture now while I'm speaking that will let me know how you're feeling without needing to interrupt me. The twinkles up gesture is like an applause, except for I don't need to wait for you to stop applauding for me to speak again. I can integrate your feedback into my discourse. Okay, temperature check. Good. All right, who uses gesture codes? This is some of the research I've been doing here. Well, you don't need to go too far to see a gesture code. Just go into some of the factories surrounding Aachen. This is some ethnographic work I've done in the factories around here. What I saw in a fish factory is that there were a lot of gestures being performed. So, for example, this one means increase in this fish factory. This one means change production process, and this one means It, me- it means too big. Okay.
5 minutes to go.
All right, great. What I did in one of these factories is formalize their gesture code for them, and then building on that, I was able to create new gestures to propose for them to communicate messages that were previously communicated by shouting. So to provide this, to facilitate communication, to help them to communicate with gestures. Not only in factories, but also, of course, the military and special forces use gestures. I'd been using this picture for quite a while until I realized that actually it was a bit of a spoof. So the gesture on the right, what do you think this means? Sorry, I just had Mexican food. And this gesture,
I don't want Mexican food.
nearly, it means no pickle. Okay, this is funny, but it actually shows that gestures can have many meanings which need to be agreed on in advance. And this is painfully demonstrated in the following video. Okay, so one of the research projects we have in our group at the moment is looking at naturalness and intuition in gesture creation. Now, she's working on this project not to create gestures for military operations, but for human-computer interaction. This is really important. What can a computer recognize? What can a human perform as natural and intuitive? Okay, taking gesture codes one step further, we have the sign languages of the deaf. Whenever deaf communities have come together, they elaborate a highly complex system of gestures which goes beyond gestures into signs. And here we have syntax, morphology, lexis, linguistic structure. And actually one of the visiting professors in our group at the moment is studying turn-taking, like we do in speech, but in Brazilian sign language narratives, like we see here. Sign language. Okay, now, here's my proposal for this evening. I'd like to propose that we can create, not a sign language, that's for the deaf community, but we can somehow work towards a spontaneous gesture code that we can use to communicate with each other on campus at the RWTH in very specific environments, but we could use this in all kinds of fun ways. Okay, but one thing to highlight is that, and I learned this the hard way when working in a factory as an applied researcher, you can't just create a communication system and then impose it onto a community of users. It has to be something that comes from within, otherwise it won't be accepted. So, I've created a website, RWTH Gesture Code project. It's a Google site, and this is going to be a space for discussion where we can perhaps elaborate our own communication system to use in lecture halls and in classrooms where communication with speaking is often difficult, but where students and professors need to communicate with each other regularly for the learning environment to be ideal. This is an idea I've got, and I want to see what you think. So, do you agree to give this a try tonight? Here are my proposals for some of the ways that we might be able to use such a gesture code. How many of you have ever walked into a classroom or a lecture hall that has a lot of people in it and that smells a little bit funny? Wouldn't it be nice, maybe, to be able to ask the professor nicely, perhaps to open a window or something? Because sometimes these rooms, I don't know if you've been in one of the first year lecture halls for the machine bar students, it's like a zoo. That's what it smells like, more particularly a zoo that is used for keeping elephants in. My proposal is that you might not want to ask the professor to open a window, for example, and you might not feel that you have the authority as a student or as a researcher to do that yourself. What about a simple gesture we might be able to use that could indicate to those around that this might be a good idea? For example, a tap on the nose might be able to encode the need to open a window and to communicate that efficiently and without stepping on anybody's toes and being polite. But basically you're saying, excuse me, your classroom smells like a zoo. can we do something about it, especially, particularly one that keeps elephants? Okay, this is the basic idea. I don't how much time do I have left, please?
If I am very polite, then 30 seconds.
Okay, so I don't have long. There are several different gestures we can make. Clarifying question. You hold up a C. This is more for English, but we could find a new way. As I say, I'm just explaining the principles, really. You're in a lecture hall. You don't raise a hand to ask a question. You show that you have a point or a comment, and it is a clarifying question. It's not an interruption. The professor can integrate that into their discourse. They can either respond to it immediately, or they can decide, okay, maybe he or she would like to clarify something, so I can just repeat my discourse, or I can reformulate it in a different way. So they can have these different musings. And then you can have, confusion if you're confused. If the discourse is confusing, to a point that you can no longer follow, and it could be a way of saying, Professor, are you in touch with reality still? And then instead of the two-handed version, you can just use the one-handed version. Okay, so to wrap it up, this is also a gesture from the Occupy system. The proposal tonight has been for, perhaps, that we could use gestures, or a gesture code that we create ourselves as a clever communication system for students and professors to communicate with each other on campus. This is our gesture code, the EVTH gesture code, that is a campus-wide system, perhaps to be used in classrooms and lecture rooms. So, this is the EVTH gesture code, brought to you by a member of Natural Media and Engineering. Vielen Dank.